Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is lesson 2-6. We are subtracting decimal numbers. Before we get into the subtraction of the decimal numbers, I want to just go through a whole number subtraction problem to kind of refresh our brains, because this is something that you've been doing for quite a while. So I figured we will start here. So I go ahead and I'm always going to move from right to left when I subtract, and I'm going to start in the ones place. I see that the number on top is smaller than the number on the bottom, so I'm going to borrow or ungroup. Because I don't have enough here, like if I had 6 candy bars, I don't have enough to give you 9. So I'm going to borrow from the 7. The 7 becomes 1 less, which is 6. And that 10 that I just borrowed is going to become 10 ones. So 6 plus 10 is 16. So now I can go ahead and subtract. 16 minus 9 is 7. And then I go to my tens place. 6 minus 4, I can do that. That is 2. I move over to the hundreds place. 5 minus 2 is 3. And I don't have any thousands here, so 4 minus 0 is 4. So I have 4,327 is my answer. If I wanted to go ahead and check my work, I could add the answer to my subtraction problem to 249, and I should get this top number. Okay, so we can use what we have here to help us check with addition. Now, if I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do subtraction with decimals, it's going to be the same thing. I'm still working from right to left, just like I was in addition yesterday. I'm still going to do the same steps, except now I have a decimal that I need to make sure that I put in my answer. So we line up the decimal places. This is already lined up for us, so I'm just going to add it to my answer. I'm doing a quick double check that my answer has a decimal point in the right place. My hundredths are lined up with hundredths. My tenths are lined up with tenths. Ones, tens, and hundreds. Everything is lined up, so I now know that I can go ahead and start my subtraction. I start here, 1 minus 1 is 0. And then I move on to the next column, 0 minus 4. Well, I don't have enough. I don't have enough to give you 4 if I have 0. So I'm going to have to ungroup or borrow from the ones. So these 5 ones are going to become 4 ones, and I'm taking that 1 that I just borrowed and breaking it into 10 tenths, which is why it goes over here above the 0. So I have 10 tenths. Now I can take 10 tenths minus 4 tenths, which gives me 6 tenths. Now I'm going to move over to the ones, and I see I have 4 minus 9, which I cannot do, so I now have to borrow or ungroup these 9 tens. So the 9 becomes an 8, and that extra 10 becomes 10 ones, and now I have 14. 14 minus 9 is 5, and then I move over to the next column. So I have 8 tens minus 7 tens, which leaves me 1 10 left over, and then 3 hundreds minus 1, 3 minus 1 is 2. So I end up with 215 and 60 hundredths. But we already know that we can write this as 215 and 6 tenths because that 0 at the end is just a placeholder. So I have 215 and 6 tenths. If you are having a difficult time with lining up your subtraction problems and lining up the decimal, one thing that I recommend is thinking about turning your paper sideways. So if you have a piece of notebook paper, we can turn it on its side, and then we use each of these lines as a column to help us line up the problems. So I'm going to go ahead and do a pretty large subtraction problem. So we're going to do 610,877 and 5 tenths. And I'm going to subtract from that 22,000, so I'm lining up my numbers, 22,000, commas are in the same place, 948. And this is what I'm going to subtract. As you can see, I've lined up all of my numbers. They're lined up in their places. I have no decimal on this bottom number, so I'm going to have to add in a decimal and a 0 for a placeholder. Now I can go ahead and subtract. I can even put a 0 up here as a placeholder too, so that I make sure that everything is looking good for my subtraction. So I'm going to put my decimal in the answer. I'm double checking that my decimals are lined up. They're nice right on that line. And now I can go ahead and subtract. 5 minus 0 is 5. I go to my ones column and I have 7 minus 8, which I cannot do because the top number is smaller. So I need to borrow from this 7. So instead of 7 tens, it's going to become 6 tens. And that 1 10 I just borrowed is going to become 10 plus 7, which is 17 ones. 17 minus 8 is 9. And I go over to my tens. 6 tens minus 4 is 2 tens. I move over to the next column. 8 minus 9 I cannot do. So I've got to borrow from the next place. Well, I have no thousands, so I need to go all the way over and borrow from the 1. So the 1 becomes a 0, and this becomes a 10, because I took this 10,000 and I turned it into 10 thousands. So now I can borrow from this 10 to give some to the 8. So I'm basically doing double borrowing on this one. So this 10 now becomes a 9, and my 8 becomes an 18. Now I can go 18 minus 9 is 9. I go over to the next column. 9 minus 2 is 7. And now I have 0 minus 2, which I cannot do because I can't give you 2 if I don't have any. And I'll borrow from the 6. This becomes a 5, and my 0 now becomes a 10. 10 minus 2 is 8. 5 minus 0 is 5. I'm going to count 3 places from the decimal. 1, 2, 3. My comma goes in the same place. You can see my commas are still lined up. And my answer becomes 587,929 and 5 tenths.